seeing a police officer, man or woman, has been very rare, and in doing so, usually it's when somebody gets arrested. And this is not casting any aspersion on the police force itself, but we know that resources have been exceptionally stretched.
Many of the far-right protests and riots targeted mosques. We've seen those horrific, well, you can't even call them protests, can you? I mean, they're riots and disorder, aren't they? Starting in Stockport, but then quickly spreading up and down the country. Very soon, faith leaders were warning their members. And I think this, for me, is the really tragic bit. This is the worst bit of it. You know, people being urged not to walk alone, not to attend their mosque, and to stay indoors where possible. Birmingham, of course, we know was set to be a flashpoint, and many Muslims came out in front of their mosque to protect it, and of course throughout areas of Birmingham, the city that was viewed as being a target or could have fallen victim to these demonstrations. And there's a huge amount of contention here, isn't there? Because of course we saw some really pockets of ugly scenes with knives brandished on air. And then I point you to an article that was in the Times where there was the journalist at the Times had actually managed to speak to some of those involved who said, well, actually, we were only protecting our community. We were only coming out because we didn't think we would be protected by the authorities. And there's somebody I want to bring into the conversation now, Fiyaz Mughal, who is, of course, the founder of Faith Matters and Tell Mama. I've known Fiyaz for a long time, and he's, of course, was in line to become the government's previous advisor on Islamophobia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you could make it onto the show this week, Fiyaz. And I just wanted to start by asking you, in your view, when you looked at what happened in Birmingham, obviously there's no justification for violence, but this was a community that was under threat, wasn't it?
Very much so. There was a great deal of messaging going around, the same messaging you just mentioned around, making sure people are not going to mosques, stay indoors, try to keep your brothers and sisters in the house. There was a great deal of fear that was generated. Within that, also, there was a sense that their local institutions, their mosques, were under threat, and so individuals, basically came together to try to, in their eyes and their ears, kind of defend their local institutions. Part of that was also a feeling that visible policing in these areas has been missing for a number of years. So a lot of this was also driven by the fact that they felt they had to take matters into their own hands, wrongly, but visible policing, or rather the lack of it, has also been another driver in this mix of why these individuals turned up.
So it's not so much two-tier policing as no-tier policing for these particular communities?
Very much so. A sense of kind of, seeing a police officer, man or woman, has been very rare, and in doing so, usually it's when somebody gets arrested. And this is not casting any aspersion on the police force itself, but we know that resources have been exceptionally stretched. We know that in some areas it's been difficult to be able to police in some of our areas, simply because it's not just resourcing, it's a question of actually some communities have not felt confident enough to engage with police forces. They've tried to tackle issues internally within themselves. And the reality is, part of this is the lack of visible policing. Part of it is the over the last decade, a sense that Muslim communities pretty much have been going through a sense and a cycle of fear. As we know, anti-Muslim hatred or Islamophobia has risen in terms of statistically the number of cases reported to Talmama and the police forces has risen quite significantly over the last decade.
What needs to let me just go back a step, actually. When we've seen the pictures, and we see the pictures on social media, and we've seen the videos on social media of people of colour being attacked in the street, being attacked, finding themselves, having to reverse out of incredibly dangerous situations where they're going to be potentially dragged from their cars. Do you think that only added to the fear that communities like the one in Birmingham were looking at these images on social media and thinking, actually, not us, not this time?
Very much so. I mean, very much so. That, you know, obviously we have a young coterie of individuals who are reacting to those kind of pictures. They're reacting. Sadly, they reacted by turning out. I don't think that was the appropriate way. But the reality is, there was a sense of self-protection. There was a sense that over the last decade, the perspective is that Muslim, in their minds, the perspective is that Muslim communities are under real risk and real threat. This is, as I said, this is over a decade, even going back to 9/11. So this is all this sense that the community feels embattled. And in that sense of feeling embattled, there are individuals who are trying to take matters into their own hands. That is a growing sense within parts of Muslim communities. Obviously, lack of visible policing. Obviously, the sense of fear and trepidation has rapidly increased. And this time, with these kind of videos and the kind of sense of mobilization of the far right, the speed of mobilization and the volume of mobilization of the far right, this created a sense that actually something needed to be done. And so people turned up, for example, in Birmingham to take action and to take, in a way, the law into their own hands, which was the very unfortunate thing.
If I could just move you on to a couple of related subjects, but moving away from the riots themselves. Now, the government is reportedly considering adopting an official definition of Islamophobia, which is, and I'm quoting here, Islamophobia is rooted in racism and a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. Is that something to be welcomed?
I think there needs to be. So first of all, I think getting a definition of anti-Muslim hatred or Islamophobia is important. I take that starting position. There has to be some form of definition, but that definition must be in accordance with the current and existing laws. That is absolutely key here. And so we need more work done on the definition. Those that are pushing for a definition to be accepted right now, I think, have their point of view. I don't accept it. We need more work done on refining the definition to be in tandem with existing laws. And also, we need a sense that actually any terminology used in the definition doesn't inflame or give oxygen to groups like the far right. And so we need to look at terminology, we need to look at the application to the law, but we definitely need a definition of anti Muslim hatred in our country. We do need that.
Can you just explain for anyone listening what is the crux of this issue where it says where you say that a definition of Islamophobia has to be within existing laws? What do you mean by that? Can you just expand?
Well, basically, if somebody says, for example, within articles or within opinion that something may be Islamophobic, well, actually, what's the reality of that opinion? In other words, is it creating a clear assessment of a situation in society, or is it adding more kind of smoke to the issue? So let me explain. There are existing laws that are very clear, both around religious and racial hatred and issues around public order offences. But if we have, for example, a definition that is quite wide, that says, for example, Islamophobia is around the targeting of Muslimness. The definition of Muslimness for one set or one community in Islam may be completely different to the definition of Muslimness to another section of Muslim communities. And actually using that just creates kind of a tool by which, in a way, free speech can also be curtailed. So, for example, let me give you one example. I completely abhor people who want to have multiple partners in marriage. I think that's distinctly wrong in our society and its values, and also from an Islamic perspective. I think it's distinctly wrong from my definition and my understanding of Islamic tradition. But some Muslims may have polygamous marriages. Now, I think that's distinctly wrong. Can that definition of an attack on somebody's Muslimness be used against me. And so there are some legitimate areas where we talk about free speech, where here free speech actually is important. It's fundamentally important. But we need to be clear where the line is in relation to infringements within the law. I think it's really important to have that clear definition, because there are discussions we need to have in society, both within Muslim communities and externally within Muslim communities, which need to be protected within the law, but accepted that these are legitimate discussions to have. And this is part of this debate of what's happened, that there are certain elements which are unacceptable. And those elements which are unacceptable clearly need to have parameters that fit within the law, so that society clearly sees those parameters and it doesn't feel like actually this is a woolly definition. This is a definition that's so expansive it doesn't have any real value. This is a definition to curtail free speech. And so I think that's why I keep saying to be a definition that sits within existing laws. I'll give you another, just let me also give you another example. Imagine turning up to court with a defense lawyer saying, do you know, within, or a prosecutor saying within the definition of Islamophobia, and then repeating a definition of Islamophobia within court, a judge would clearly say, well, that's not relevant to me in my court. How is that relevant? And so it has no real relevance in the prosecution, but it simply has relevance in discussion and the possibility of curtailing some of these discussions we need to have with sensitivity, with
Yeah.
sensitivity. That's important, but that's why and I hope I laid it out. It's a
You have. You
contradiction.
have. Fiyaz, we must stop it. We must stop there. Just for time reasons, I'd love to continue this conversation. Fiyaz Mughal, the founder of Faith Matters, and Tell Mama, thank you for your time.